It's the week ending Saturday, the 23rd of September, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen an earthquake killing hundreds in Mexico, Theresa May outlining her current plan for post-Brexit Britain, and a controversial appearance by Sean Spicer at the Emmys. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And with me from the week's digital team are Rebecca Gillie, Arion McNicoll and Cameron Tait. And starting the show this week, it's Rebecca. What do you think this week is going to be remembered for?
It turns out your grandma doesn't have to Oh, damn it. You'll be very disappointed with the actual result. I'm glad you all had fun. It turns out your grandma doesn't have to hide her favourite toy.
What are your thoughts on Golliwogs?
It was a very, very charming child's toy. And if I remember, the Gollywog was always the most intelligent toy.
So do you think that maybe they should make a comeback?
Well, we should have a range of toys, shouldn't we? Why not have a Gollywog? We've got white toys. Why not a Gollywog? Why not a Chinese toy? Have them all.
UKIP leadership candidate Elizabeth Jones there, speaking to Sam Delaney on News Thing back in 2016. Rebecca, 2016? There's a lifetime ago. Why is that your week's highlight?
Well, a new poll's just been conducted by YouGov this week, which has found that 63% of Britons do not believe that Golliwogs are racist.
Wow.
Yeah. So this poll was subdivided by age and political affiliation and the way that the respondents voted in the EU referendum. So it found that young people and Lib Dem voters were the most likely to find them racist, and those aged 65 and over and Leave voters and Conservative voters were the most likely to say they were not racist.
Okay, I mean, that's actually perhaps not surprising when you break it down demographically. I guess it's just perhaps a shock that it's taking so long for this information to seep through that people find Golliwogs offensive because, I mean, the Enid Blyton estate had to deal with this like 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, I mean, just for the background on Golliwogs, the Gollywog character was invented in the 1890s by an American author called Florence Kate Upton, who said she based it in turn on a toy she found in an attic. To anyone who is particularly interested in Western cultural history, the Gollywog is quite clearly based on Blackface Minstrel with the
comical clown lips,
the big red lips, bushy hair, dressed in the kind of brightly coloured minstrel outfits. So a lot of people who are defenders of the Gollywog say that playing with them as children, they had no idea that they had any racial connotations. They did not look at them as a depiction of black people. But to me, that's not an excuse. You can't say because you didn't know about something.
No, but
that doesn't
not
take
the
away
same as
the facts.
Sure, but it's not like, for example, if you look at the character of Fagin in Oliver Twist, who, one of the things that makes him a bit odd and sort of snide is that he's Jewish. It's not the case with Golliwogs in Enid Blyton, is it? Or on the Robertson's Jam Tin. They are actually benign characters. They are seen as often the hero of the story or a friendly toy to play with.
Yeah,
so
but
that's true, isn't it? They're not in themselves racist depictions. It's that when they're the sole representation of a blackface in a toy cabinet, that's the problem.
Well, I mean, even in the days of minstrelsy, the blackface minstrels were often sympathetic characters, but they were grotesque, physical depictions of what people then considered to be, black features. And to see that represented in a toy is obviously, it's very offensive and hurtful to people who are familiar with those caricatures. And I think a lot of people say, well, they aren't familiar with them and so they have no idea of any racial implication, but I just find that ridiculous. I mean, the blackface minstrel show was on until the 80s.
Do you find this ridiculous?
Well, I was going to say,
Cameron.
Enid Blyton actually portrayed Golliwogs as mischievous. So in her Noddy books, Golliwogs would always be known for stealing Noddy's car. So they were never always kind of this kind of, harmless and kind of always portrayed nicely. But going back to the point of playing with them as kids and then not knowing, when I used to go over to my grandparents' house, I believe they had a Gollywog there. And I never grew up thinking this is racist until I saw minstrels and someone made me aware that it might be racist. And I looked at it and thought, okay, that's quite clear now. And you change your perception because you're innocent. You're given some information and that changes your way of thinking.
I think the startling thing about that survey is that the question is asking people, knowing what we know now about Golliwogs, do you think that they are racist or not? And the really sort of upsetting thing about it is that every group overwhelmingly said that they found them inoffensive rather than offensive. No matter how you broke it down demographically, yes, it was more for people, leave voters than remain voters, but even young people.
The thing with young people, though, is that older people were overwhelmingly more likely to have an opinion one way or the other, whereas young people, it was like 30-something% said they were racist, 30-something% said they weren't, another 30% said they didn't know, which to me implies that compared to people over the age of 65, only 7% didn't know. So it implies to me that maybe they've been off shelves and out of public display for so long that young people just don't really know what they are, and so they don't really have an opinion. Whereas the older generation, I feel like Golliwogs have become kind of a symbolic battleground. It's a bit like bendy bananas for the EU. It's become a symbol of everything that they once treasured and thought was
political correctness gone mad.
Yeah, political correctness has gone mad. All of the harmless things from their idyllic childhoods are now being taken away from them and turned into something bad.
But you can understand that for the reasons Cameron said. When you play with it as a child, it is innocent. So when they're older now, they just don't understand what the fuss is about. That generation's always going to find it harder to understand.
But there's an unwillingness to learn, which I think comes from the fact that we're at a kind of in-between stage, I think, as a society when it comes to race, where we've gone through the initial stage of racism is bad, it's bad to discriminate against people based on their race, but we're kind of in this in-between stage now where we haven't got to that more mature understanding that people can participate in racist behaviour or attitude and not themselves be bad people. We've kind of reached this, it's the circular logic of, if it's racist and I like them, that would make me racist. I'm not a bad person, and so I can't be racist, therefore the things I like can't be racist, which is just not true. And I think it shows that we have got a long way still to go in that conversation.
And I think that there's this feeling among those people who are anti the so-called PC brigade that they're being lectured to, and they don't want to be lectured to. And I think maybe that's also what you're talking about, that to convince people who think of a certain attitude as harmless, to convince them that actually it's harmful, we need to find a new way of communicating that isn't perhaps so accusatory. And I think that that's maybe where attacks against people for things that they regard as symbolically not actually that problematic need to get smarter. It needs to not be an attack for one thing, but we need to find a way to convince people that their golliwogs actually do stand for all of the things that they stand for, and maybe they're not worth defending.
Yeah, but crucially, that doesn't make them a bad person. If you have fond childhood memories, that doesn't mean that you are bad or that those memories are irrevocably tainted.
Okay, I'm just going to throw a spanner in the Golliwogs here, because the question that was asked was actually, do you think it is racist to buy or sell golliwogs in 2017? And I looked at that question and I thought, well, that's been deliberately constructed, that question, actually, to avoid explaining when that gollywog was made, which I think is actually a crucial distinction. If the question was, should Marks and Spencer be selling new golliwogs to babies, I think the answer would have been much clearer from everyone. No, that's wrong and it's racist. But the way the question was posed, it was kind of like, well, if you've got one that you bought from a charity shop or you've got an authentic toy that was passed to you from your grandparents, then exactly as you say, you're harbouring some secret racist feeling, which is what people said, no, this is just a toy I've inherited about. And I think that was deliberately obfuscated, actually.
Yeah, the wording of the question, is it racist to sell or display them? So, yeah, it does allow for people to say, well,
because it arguably isn't racist to sell a gollywog on eBay that you inherited. It's, it's a toy. And we've had many conversations about rewriting history. It is part of toy history.
Yeah, but racism is part of history too. And I think it's just, there's no way to divorce it from its racist origins. You can only stuff your fingers in your ears, and I think that people are doing that because they feel that to admit it's racist would be to admit something bad about themselves.
And I also think that actually the cleverness of the way that the sentence was constructed, or the question was constructed, was that it was asking people about this toy specifically. So already they're having to pause and think, why am I being asked this? They're probably realizing that they're being asked a question about racism. It's not like they had a lineup of 5 toys and said, are any of these toys problematic? They were talking about golliwogs. And so it's actually asking people almost to defend their quasi-racist views or to speculate on the relationship between this doll and racism.
But if you run an antique shop, why not sell a golly toy?
To my mind, that it's no different from any other representation of minstrelsy. And I'm sure they've got a value to collectors or historians, and even to museums. To buy and sell them and display them and maintain this fiction that they just sprung from nowhere, they weren't born from any kind of cultural history it's just denial, and I don't think that we should humour it.
Okay, so if you're listening to this and you've got a Gollywog at home because it was your grandma's favourite toy, should you be hiding it away like Ashley Jensen in Extras? Should you, if you rent your house out on Airbnb, should you make sure that isn't on display because it's inherently offensive?
Yes, in my mind, it's no different from any other kind of racist memorabilia, which I certainly wouldn't put on display if I was going to rent my house out to
all your Nazi stuff is in the
strangers.
garage.
Exactly. I mean, imagine that you grew up in a very sheltered society and you knew nothing about the Nazis or World War II, and then you came forward trying to tell everyone that swastikas are a Hindu peace symbol and no, they're not connected to hatred. It's not the rest of the world's fault that you don't know that, and it doesn't make it untrue just because you're ignorant of it. And to me, it's no different from that. I think we do need to educate people, and as Arion was saying, maybe that needs to be done in a more sensitive, conciliatory way.
Do you all agree? Hide your Golliwogs?
Yeah, exactly.
Hide your Golliwogs.
Hide them.
But isn't that saying, I think this is a racist thing and I'm going to put it away like something I'm ashamed of?
Yes, but if you have it, and it was your grandparents' favourite toy, you have that backstory, and you're the only one that knows the symbol behind it. But someone who's just going to come into your house might see a Gollywog and go, well, that's offensive. So just hide it away. It's not hard.
It's a sensitivity to the potential to offend rather than anything else.
Arion, you're next. What do you think this week is going to be remembered for?
So I'm wondering whether the biggest football teams in the world will soon be Atletico Madrid and AC/DC United.
People have always competed in video games, even say Pac-Man at the local arcade, people would compete for local high scores. But now, since technology's increased, so now it's easier for people can play against each other online, and also now it's easier for people to watch it online. Huge companies like Twitch TV, which lets people live stream video games and live stream tournaments to millions of people online. I mean, we've seen with YouTube as well. People like watching others play video games. It's very popular.
Oh, it's so nerdy, isn't it? Jack Stewart there, who is the UK's first national reporter for esports, speaking on the podcast for journalism.co.uk. Arion, why are we talking about esports?
So it strikes me that this appointment is yet another step in the rise and rise of esports that began with the emergence of smaller teams and
we should explain what esports are, I suppose, for the portion of the audience who still don't know.
Yes, esports are online video games being played by groups of teams together and being broadcast to large audiences.
And being watched in stadia by people.
And I think that's what's fascinating, that it started out as something that people were doing that was relatively small and niche, and now it's being watched in stadia.
I mean, that is weird, isn't it? I mean, it's like darts. It's a game, isn't it? I mean, I know there's an audience for it, but to go to Wembley to watch it, it's not like a boxing match or a football match. It's like watching darts.
Although maybe it's even easier to watch than darts because it's all on big screens and it only exists on screens, whereas when you're watching darts and you're in a massive hall, then you're only going to be so close to the action. Although that's about drinking, which I think is a slightly different thing to esports. But
okay,
anyway, the growth is massive, and
we're talking about it because this week the Daily Mail appointed an esports editor,
an esports journalist, and it's the first appointment of its kind, the first British newspaper to appoint an esports journalist full time.
But is it for the newspaper or is it for Mail Online?
It's Mail Online, actually.
Your Gollywog-owning readers of the Daily Mail print edition aren't necessarily going to be interested in esports, are they?
No.
So, in a sense, is this that surprising? Because other websites write about esports. You'd expect Mail Online is the biggest English language website to do the same, no?
It's funny because actually the tone of his articles skew in both directions massively. On the one hand, he writes about the sort of peculiarity of the rise of these basement dwellers who are suddenly taking over the mainstream and being paid millions of pounds to do their crazy internet gaming. And then also he gets very specific about teams, about frags, about all of the terminology that so they're sort of having it both ways, really.
Okay, and Cameron, I can tell you're jumping at the bit to talk about this. Is this a pivotal moment? Is Arion right that a big mainstream title, albeit online only, a big mainstream title getting behind esports is the moment when it really does become a thing that other people apart from nerds care about?
It's certainly a tipping point, but I just want to go back to you're saying it's just for nerds. What makes this different from going out and kicking a ball around in football? Because technically they're both games. You're competing against two other teams. What's the difference? One you're sitting down and the other you're running around.
It's just so obviously not a sport, isn't it? Because it's a computer game, that's why.
See, I'm representing our younger listeners of the Week Unwrapped, and I think
I gave the example of darts. I could equally have said bridge or chess. I think there are things that are watched live that shouldn't be, and this is one of those.
But this, I disagree. I think that esports it gives people that essentially don't have the opportunities or maybe not the physical abilities to go and compete in real sports, but they are competitive and it gives them an outlet to do it. And if people are going to watch it, I don't see a problem in it.
And also, it's not just Cameron who disagrees with you, but it's the 385 million people who watch video game competitions worldwide every year. So you're actually heading towards being a minority sports fan if you're not into esports.
That's clearly an absurd claim, isn't it, Rebecca?
Well, I actually find the rise of esports spectators more astonishing and difficult to comprehend than the rise of esports, because, you know, if you're really good at video games and someone says I'll pay you to play them, then it's not surprising that you'd say yes please. But the idea, I mean, some of my most frustrating childhood memories are being stuck at a friend's house having to watch them play a game, you know, in the days when you only had one controller, like will be your go in a minute. Now there are millions of people who are willing to sit and watch other people play video games. I wonder if we have become more passive possibly as a society and more receptive to the idea that fun is watching other things happen while you do nothing.
But it's funny you say that, because I think by saying that, it actually proves that esports has actually got quite a lot in common with regular sports, such as football. So one of the biggest appeals of football is you can go and watch it on TV, support your heroes, and then you can afterwards go out and kick a ball around with your friends. And you can do it on the same size pitch, or so you can recreate your favourite moments. And you can do the same in esports, because it's a game you can go and pick up. So you can go and watch your heroes and think, God, if they can go and do that, I can do it as well. And maybe I'll become an esports hero too.
But the question about passivity is a legitimate one. And in fact, you know, the 2012 Olympic Games were meant to be a moment that inspired a generation of new sports people. And actually, apparently, I was reading this week, there's been about a 1% drop in outdoor activity since 2012. So fewer people are running around.
But maybe they're inspired to get involved in esports. Maybe the opening ceremony of the next Olympics will just involve lots of people playing Monkey Island.
that dates us more than anything.
And actually, what are the big esports titles that people play? FIFA and things like that.
FIFA's one. There's stadium games where you take control of an army of various kinds and go head-to-head. They're sort of chess-like, something between chess and some sort of live action game. So that includes Dota 2, League of Legends. And then you have these sort of first-person stab and shoot people to death games like Call of Duty and Counter-Strike and so on.
There's also a massive rise in the world of motorsport as well. So it kind of kicked off in about 2008 with a very famous racing series called Gran Turismo, and they call it GT Academy. And it basically involves gamers they'll go through various challenges on the computer game to try and set the fastest time. Then on the next round, they'll go through to fitness exercises. Then they'll go through to driving a real car. And whoever comes out on top will become a fully fledged, licensed and signed Nissan racing driver.
And that happened?
That happens every year. And one of the most famous chaps to do it, he's a Brit called Jan Mardenborough, has raced in Le Mans, has raced in GP3 and Formula 2 as well. And they are very successful.
Well, maybe the best player at Call of Duty will get signed up by the US Army and go and kill people for real.
Well, you say it as a joke, but actually drone operators are often found from the gaming world.
What a terrifying world we live in. Genuinely terrifying.
This is a whole different angle, but just throwing it out there from a social perspective, all the work that's been done in regular sport over the decades of like opening it up to women, kicking racism out, and now if people are drifting towards online and gaming and esports, like, are we going to have to start that process all over again? Because gaming is notorious for its sexism, racism, hate speech of various kinds.
But the opportunities available to women, I mean, on an exactly equal basis with men to prove themselves.
Yeah, but a lot of women are put off by the atmosphere.
But that's the culture around it.
It's a wild west compared to the world of organised competitive sport that we have been curating for hundreds of years. It does open up an interesting, kind of new frontier for that.
And I gather most of the attendees at the stadium gatherings are male, overwhelmingly
You are
male.
kidding me.
Who would have thought it?
That's where you got to go if you want to find a man, isn't it? Snap them up.
But I think if we're going to dig into this deeper. There are a lot of female gamers out there, but there is this trend that's rising of women that stream playing video games live, mainly to a male audience because they don't wear a lot of clothing. So you've got men that are kind of fueling this kind of craze, and it's really not going to help women kind of get into gaming and competitive
it's no different
gaming.
from, do you remember lingerie American football? It was moderately
He says
controversial.
a little too enthusiastically. I do remember that story.
I mean, theoretically, esports should be the ultimate sport where women and men can compete as equals. But I wonder if the culture is not sufficiently detoxified for it to become a mainstream interest.
And Rebecca, if you were to take part in a games tournament, what would be your game?
Battlefield 1 or Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2.
And for yourself, Cameron?
Anything with 4 wheels and a steering wheel.
And Arion?
Yeah, Monkey Island.
You can date us so easily, can't you? Mine would be Game Boy Tetris. 2-player edition with the connected wires between the two devices. I was very good at that. Last up this week, it's Cameron. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
It should be remembered for motor shows because they're just for boys.
Cougar, if you're man enough. Cougar, it's the meanest, most masculine road animal yet.
Cougar, if you're man enough.
Cougar.
An advert there for a 1967 car, the Mercury Cougar. The news story of the week. Cameron, why?
Oh, it's great talking about cars again on the Week Unwrapped. So last week I was at the Frankfurt Motor Show, which is going on right now, and I was reporting on all the lovely new cars for our online site. But the biggest standout feature when I was there wasn't the F1-engined new Mercedes hypercar. It was the sheer amount of female models standing next to the cars wearing very little clothing.
And when you say the standout feature, do you mean you were distracted by that, or do you mean genuinely that seemed to be the most notable thing of the car show?
It was incredibly notable, and I spoke to quite a lot of other journalists while I was there and said, is this still happening at lots of other car shows? Is this still a common thing? And they were saying, yes, it's getting a little bit better, but I just find when you're walking around, you are there for the cars. You are there to go and report on the new metal. If you are there, you're enthusiastic about cars. I don't see why I need a model wearing very little clothing to stand next to it. And when I go and take a picture of that car, they have to be in the picture.
Is that actually what happens?
Yes.
Okay.
I tried taking pictures
when you
of
say
several
have
cars.
to be in the picture, you mean BMW say you can only take a picture of the car with the model in it?
No, but as soon as you go near it to go and take a picture, they start moving towards it, as if to say, "Oh, I'll be in the picture of this car as well."
Yeah.
Why? I don't need you there to go and take a picture of it. Some of them are there to provide you information about the cars, and the ones that usually aren't dressed in mini skirts and skin tight lycra.
You said the ones. You mean the women?
The women.
The women
Well, there
who
are men there as well
to
that do it.
Yes.
But it's
Okay,
predominantly
so
women.
that's the point, isn't it? Like, there's nothing wrong. I think we'd all agree in companies that are. It's a sales fair. Companies that are trying to sell things, employing attractive people of both genders. You know, you probably shouldn't discriminate and only choose those people, but you'd understand why front and centre of your marketing effort, you're going to put people who look attractive. Yeah. And if there are a few more women than men because there are more men attending than women, maybe that's just going to happen. Mm-hmm. The difference that you're talking about is literally people walking around in miniskirts and with wonder bras on, right?
Exactly, yeah. That is what has troubled me from coming away from this.
So there isn't really a news story here. You've just gone to a car show and this is your observation.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Well, I've been to
Is that good enough to bring to my podcast?
Yes, of course. Of course it is. No, I've been to a few motor shows. This is the first major one that I've been to, and I was astounded to see that it was so prominent.
So the tipping point here is that you, Cameron, think this has to stop.
Indeed.
Okay, discuss.
One of the questions that was in my mind over this when Karen proposed it as a story was that question of whether sex does still sell. And it reminded me of an article that I read a couple of years ago that was a creative agency director talking about that very question. And his feeling was that sex can still sell, but the way that it works has changed significantly. His idea was that sexuality has to be relatable, which is the kind of thing that we see in more average body types and, you know, flesh on display of different ages and genders and that sort of thing. And also the assumption, even within a motoring audience, that everybody there is male or that the average consumer is male and that they're straight. Any sort of study that you care to look at shows that people's identification with heterosexuality is changing, and particularly young people. So I think there are questions about whether it's sensible to put scantily clad women next to cars anymore. You say that there are men there doing the same thing. But,
Yes.
But they're not in pants, presumably.
No, they're not. So you'll find some manufacturers that have diversity. We've got men and women on the stands. They're usually in trousers and T-shirts. Yes, they are quite physically fit, and if you go up to them, they will tell you stuff about the car. But there are other car makers where you go up to them that are exclusively female. They don't know a lot about the cars, and they're not wearing much. When I talked to the younger attendees that were there, they said it makes them feel quite uncomfortable. I'm the same. Whereas if you talk to the older ones, or the old guard, they will more ask you of which ones were the best.
Rebecca.
Well, it kind of creates an atmosphere, doesn't it, that says this is who this event is for. And I think even though, female journalists obviously now attend these events as well, there'll always be a difference between the atmosphere of this event is for you and you may come to this event that is not aimed at you. I think when you have scantily clad female models, you are sending out a signal that this is what this industry is about and this is what we value and this is what we look like. We look like straight men, essentially. I mean, if these women are professional models, should they be allowed to practice their profession, without being lambasted by, the socially progressive tastemakers?
Yeah, they're there because they want to be there and make money. They're not there being objectified against their will.
Yeah, presumably.
But what has that got to do with, the new Ferrari? That's the issue, isn't it?
Exactly. There are, so kind of really digging into this, I'm not digging into there shouldn't be models there. So digging into this story, I've come to find that there are a lot of women that do this because they have much more serious jobs during the week. Some work in care, others work in the NHS and the likes of that. They kind of want this outlet. They may have done modelling before and they can go and do this. And they also have a passion for cars. So I don't have a problem with that. And they will want to be there and want to talk about cars. But why
would
do you
have
need
a
to
problem
wear...
with it even if they were full-time models? What's the issue about whether they work in care for the NHS or not?
Yeah, but what I was saying is my problem is why do they need to be in not wear much? I mean, surely you can be there and you can look smart and you can talk about cars wearing a tracksuit or something like that. I don't see why it needs to be skin-tight clothing.
Well, it comes down to choice feminism, really, which is like one of the big debates in contemporary feminism, which is, are decisions that women make inherently feminist because women are making them? Or is there a point where we have to say, you may personally feel empowered by, posing in, a scanty outfit next to a nice car, but if we collectively feel that decision is harming women as a whole or the advancement of women into, say the motoring industry, should we say something? It's the same thing with sex work. Should we empower women who want to pursue that avenue of work? Or should we say, actually, the image of women selling their bodies is bad for women collectively, and therefore we should be opposed to it on those grounds?
And I think it's kind of the oldest trick in the book, isn't it, to get the spokesmodel to defend their modelling, and by doing so legitimise the having of models next to cars. So I want to jump in and defend Cameron here because I think this is an important story. It's weird that in 2017 we still have women standing next to cars in bikinis. And it's weird that it doesn't seem to be showing any signs that it's going to go away.
Okay, if it was an aftershave show, I don't know if such a thing exists. If it was the International Perfume Conference, right? I would expect to see scantily clad women and men because all the advertising around fragrance still uses basically the subliminal message, spray this on you and you will have sex with this beautiful person. The car thing is simply saying, buy this Ferrari and you will have sex tonight. That's the very crude message they're trying to get across. And you may think, well, that doesn't have any bearing on how I interpret cars, but it is how cars are marketed. So in the same way as perfume, why should it be a surprise?
But it's not how cars are marketed. I can't think of a
Come
single...
on.
Well, no, aside from car shows...
Because you're a motoring journalist and you have to pretend it's serious. But if it's basically saying, put your foot to the floor in this and you will look like a more attractive person, then it is using sex to sell it.
I cannot think of a single car advert that has launched in the last 5 years, maybe even 10 years, that has had... go fast in our car and you'll have loads of women.
But it's like Arion was saying earlier, though, is that the way that sex sells has changed, and maybe we've come to expect more nuance. Like the clip we listened to at the start of this segment, you don't sell cars anymore by having a woman make an incredibly sexual remark at the wheel of a car. But when you watch cars, they're zooming around. The man driving them is really cool. The undertone is this will make you a masculine, sexually proficient man.
Is Skyfall a car advert or a movie? Like, it depends where you see your car ads, doesn't it? But there's a lot of product placement there.
I think you have to be more subtle in the way that you use sex to sell now, which makes the idea of simply throwing a scantily clad woman onto a car seem the discrepancy is even bigger, given that we don't really sell things in that blunt of a way anymore.
Exactly. It's the subtlety that the motor shows, or the way that cars are being marketed at these shows. There is no subtlety. It is literally just, hey, here's a woman wearing hardly any clothing. Let's just be a little bit more subtle about it.
Okay. And Cameron, I should ask you finally, what was the point of the motor show? You've never been to one before. You've been writing about cars for a while. You're still writing about cars now. Did you learn anything?
Apart from that, there are a lot of scantily clad women at these car shows. It was the Frankfurt Motor Show. It's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, motor show in the world. And there are lots and lots of new cars coming out.
Electric?
Lots of electric.
Is electric the future?
I think, of course, it's the future.
Why are you laughing when you say that? Because
I just think that's been said at motor shows for the last decade.
You're so right. I think with my sensible hat on, I go, yes, there's lots of exciting electric cars, yada yada yada. But there was a Formula One engined Mercedes hypercar that makes the 10-year-old in me get incredibly excited.
He made a pumping fist gesture when he said that, so he really meant it. I'll leave you with that image. Thank you to all of you, Rebecca, Gillie, Cameron Tait and Arion McNicoll. For more from The Week, why not visit theweek.co.uk, where you can also sign up to our free email newsletter, The Weekday. And remember, you can have the magazine delivered direct to your door as well. Just head to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. And every past episode of this show is also available on our podcast feed. Just search for The Week Unwrapped on your podcast app of choice. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby. The producer is Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week. Bye-bye.